When we're looking at low testosterone symptoms, things like anxiety, depression, poor sleep quality, lack of focus, lack of motivation, sexual dysfunction, not waking up with erections, the problem is that those symptoms can all be caused by poor diet and lifestyle. This is a real problem because these guys have often destroyed their endocrine system from years or decades of poor health practices, and they want to get back on track, but their body is just so screwed up.
If someone has more sensitive receptors, for instance, and we can't test for that, do we do things based more so off of symptoms and how they're feeling? And if so, what is it you're looking for? Like, who's a good candidate for TRT in that regard? Because, like, again, using myself as an example, I've never had super high levels, but I don't really feel any of the things that people that reportedly have low levels are expressing. So I would assume that maybe my receptors are more sensitive.
Absolutely. So it's very important to look at the cross-section of symptoms and lab work. The problem with low testosterone symptoms is that they're very broad and very ambiguous. So one thing is that low testosterone symptoms and low thyroid symptoms are virtually identical. So it's always important that we also screen for thyroid dysfunction as well, because that can also be a factor. But when we're looking at low testosterone symptoms, things like anxiety, depression, poor sleep quality, lack of energy, anhedonia, which is where people don't feel pleasure from things that should be pleasurable and enjoyable, lack of focus, lack of motivation, lack of drive, sexual dysfunction, not waking up with erections, things like this. The problem is that those symptoms can all be caused by poor diet and lifestyle. And the factor that connects these things as well is that poor diet and lifestyle will also suppress the testosterone levels. So the body is a very complex series of interconnected systems. And one of the failures of many aspects of healthcare, everything from fitness and nutrition all the way to Western medicine, is that we view everything in isolation. It's like going to 5 different types of mechanics and having them all service one individual component of your car. It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't deliver the best outcome. So the challenge for a practitioner who actually cares about their patients or clients and knows what they're doing is that we have to look at how the individual's feeling, look at their blood work, and say, are these symptoms actually coming from the levels being suboptimal? And if so, are the levels suboptimal in a way that we can't resolve? And there are markers in the blood work that we can look at to see if testosterone production is being suppressed, if the testicles are failing. We can also look at other blood markers to suggest, hey, is this person pre-diabetic? Do they have something like fatty liver disease? Are they eating a garbage diet that's jacking their triglycerides up? We can get a lot of indicators that really give us some good insight on how someone's looking after themselves. But it's also incredibly important, this is why 15-minute doctor's appointments don't work, is that people need to be upfront and disclose all aspects of how they're looking after themselves. Because some people have those symptoms because, they've got a newborn baby and they're an entrepreneur and they're not sleeping properly. Like there can be so many factors that will lead to these symptoms in a transient way. And if you come in and supercharge the engine by cranking up the testosterone levels, if the body's naturally suppressing that system, you're not going to end up with a smooth ride forward. If the body's pumping the brakes and you're pumping the accelerator, you're not working with the body now, you're working against it. So when you go and see someone with these symptoms and comprehensive blood work, it really has to be a skillful practitioner or an expert looking at this to actually make the diagnosis to say, yeah, look, TRT would be in your best interest, or maybe you just need to fix these other factors and see how you go and then come back over time to see if you're feeling better.
Yeah. I definitely want to talk about the landscape of TRT as you see it. Real quick before I forget, though, Andrew kept messaging me about this graph that he's seen you illustrate that basically just talks about, lifestyle factors in current day society. Like as people get busier, they have kids, they're young professionals. It's kind of like corresponding with what's happening naturally in the body with testosterone. I don't know if you know what graph he's talking about, but if you do, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Interesting story with that one. So I was emailing the team at the Mark Bell Power Project to ask if I could be a guest for like a year, and never heard back. Totally fine. I'm sure they get a whole bunch of emails. And then when I did my speech at the Silverback Summit, I did this graph the night before in Canva with like squiggly lines that I just I don't have any graphic design skill. And after the speech, Andrew saw my speech and he was like, "Hey, you need to come on the Power Project and you need to bring that graph." And I was like, well, I need to do the graph a little bit better because the one that I did looks like absolute garbage. So the Power Project came out a couple of days ago. The graph presentation's at the end, but I'll explain it here now. So the way that I look at it, so I'm very interested in behavioral psychology and I'm very interested in neuropsychiatry. So the difference between psychology and psychology is more about behavior, mood, emotions, and psychiatry is more about the architecture of the brain and neurotransmission and how this facilitates the psychology of the individual. So I'm very interested in both of these things. And when I did my postgrad, it's called a postgraduate diploma, so you can do a master's in a field that you didn't do your original undergrad in. I did that in biomedical science so that I could do neuropsychiatry to learn how to heal the brain. Turns out psychiatry is just about drugging people, so I dropped out of it pretty quickly. But the reason I got into looking at testosterone was that when you look at it from a psychiatric perspective, testosterone is basically the perfect pharmacological antidepressant for men in terms of how it impacts neurotransmission. So when we look at how testosterone levels work in well, both men and women, but particularly in men, basically you flatline the testosterone up until you hit puberty, and then you get that big spike that everyone's aware of when you're 18 to 21, depending on your development. And then assuming that you look after yourself in a relatively consistent way over the course of your life, you get a relatively linear decline. Women more so get a crash when they hit menopause. Men get more of a really gradual, insidious decline over their lifetime. But it peaks when you're 18 to 21, and then it gradually declines after that. And when we look at how life tends to work, again, assuming that people don't have a traumatic childhood and assuming that things go relatively okay for people, life's pretty cruisy when you're a toddler and when your testosterone's low, you don't have any responsibilities. You're going to school, you're playing video games, hang out with your friends. And then as you get older, there's this increased burden of performance that men have. I think that we really become adults at 30, not at 18. 18-year-old boys are not adults. They can just legally drink and drive. They're not adults. I think men become adults when they hit 30. And then as you get towards your 40s, you're more expected to have some degree of mastery, either over a skill, over yourself, over leading a family, over leading other people. It's expected that a 40 or a 45-year-old man is going to have his shit together, whereas it's kind of acceptable for a 20 to 25-year-old guy to still be like finding himself and goofing around a bit from like a societal standpoint. So as the burden of performance goes up in life, the testosterone levels are there to buffer that. And that all works out pretty well. And then as the testosterone levels go down over time, the burden of performance also goes down because as you get older, you've built your family, you've built your legacy, you can kind of sit back, put your feet up, retire and chill out. The problem that we're having though is that that burden of performance in society hasn't gone away. Absolutely not. But if the testosterone levels are peaking at half of where they were before, all of a sudden now the burden of performance for men is still up here, but the testosterone levels are at that 70-year-old level when you're 20 or 21, and it's all downhill. So the problem that I think and what I see is that we have these younger guys who don't have the biological foundation to buffer them against the stresses of life. Because when we look at what testosterone does, internally in terms of your biology, but also in terms of your psychology, it buffers against the effects of stress. So things are still difficult in life when you've got higher testosterone levels, but that challenge of pushing outside your comfort zone feels better. I think it's Andrew Huberman who says that testosterone makes effort feel good. And that's a very good way to summarize how it works because it facilitates dopamine transmission, which is like our pleasure neurotransmitter, but it buffers and offsets for a lot of the activity of cortisol and adrenaline in the body. And when we look at what leadership is, which I think if people say, well, what is masculinity? Masculinity is leadership. Is testosterone creates the capacity to develop leadership because leadership is being cool, calm, and collected and rational in stressful situations that would overwhelm other people. That's what leadership is.
100%, man, 100%. People just don't know how to be in tune with their body and know what feeling good feels like, I think, is also oftentimes the issue as well. When it comes to food and you having such an emphasis on optimizing hormone levels, is there a specific dietary protocol or macro split or certain foods that you try to incorporate on a regular basis?
So I've done and tried everything nutritionally. I'm a very big advocate for both learning in terms of science, but also learning by experience as well. So when it comes to supplements or medications or nutrition strategies, I don't even work with or recommend anything that I haven't worked with myself personally and also understood in terms of science as well. I think the best diet is something that includes nutrients that are fat soluble in bioavailable form. So for example, if you look at something like a carrot or a sweet potato, they're orange. So they contain beta carotene, which is the precursor to vitamin A. Vitamin A is one of the 5 fat soluble nutrients, being A, E, D, K, and cholesterol. And vitamin A is very important. But a lot of people, particularly Caucasian people in terms of genetics, don't metabolize beta carotene into retinol very well. So getting the fat soluble nutrients in the most bioavailable form is objectively important for hormone production. And people will say, well, yes, the body can make cholesterol on its own. That's true. That's a survival mechanism because all your hormones are made from cholesterol. And if your cortisol goes to 0, you will drop dead and die. That's the way the human body works. So you have to be able to make cholesterol endogenously. Otherwise, if you didn't get a kill during evolution, you would have just carved out and dropped dead. But the idea that we can generate enough cholesterol endogenously via a survival mechanism to optimize hormones is also objectively incorrect. So we need some degree of animal-based food in the diet. And for me, and a lot of people I've worked with looking at their blood work, I've never seen someone's health get worse from eating more meat. I've only seen people get healthier from eating more meat. So meat's great for you. Red meat is higher per gram in micronutrients than white meat, but chicken, fish, pork in Eastern Europe is much better because it's more like boar than like domesticated pig. It tastes way better too. But beef is a superfood, and then organs are higher in nutrients as well. But, that's not for everyone's palate. And I also think that fruits and vegetables should also be included in abundance. I think that raw leafy green vegetables are not great for a lot of people's guts, just based on what I've seen. I have a lot of guys come to me who are eating like meticulously and their bloating is just through the roof. Their digestion's horrible and they're eating a big bowl of raw leafy green salad with pumpkin seeds and all this stuff. And that just doesn't go well for some people. But I think cooked vegetables are fantastic. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are super high in minerals, very high in potassium. I think fruit is wonderful. Some people will equate like a glass of orange juice to a glass of Coca-Cola and say, well, it's all sugar. That's a silly reductionist model. When we look at things in nature, they contain things that buffer. So fruit is full of sugar, but it's also full of vitamin C, which buffers the oxidative processes when it comes to metabolizing sugar. Same with coffee. Coffee is full of caffeine, which is a stimulant, but then it's full of phytonutrients and all the minerals that caffeine depletes in the body. It's almost like they were put together for a reason. So I think fruit is fantastic. I mean, obviously you can overdo it if you try, but it's very difficult to eat too many bananas. Like you just get a satiety mechanism kick in. So meat, eggs, fruit, vegetables. And then if people digest them well, I think grains are fine. I mean, I wouldn't be eating a huge amount of calories from grains because they're not as micronutrient dense, but some high quality bread with some, good quality butter on it, if that fits your diet plan or if that makes the meal more enjoyable and it's home prepared, fantastic. But meat, whole eggs should be the cornerstone of the diet. I don't have any problem with dairy. If the estrogen in dairy is bioavailable, then so is the testosterone and the growth hormone. None of it is, but dairy's fantastic as well. Full fat dairy. I mean, obviously you can overdo it from a caloric standpoint and it's not very satiating, but I don't think there's any problem with dairy either. So I think that the diet can be a very rich and diverse diet, but some people will do better with higher carbohydrates. Some people do better with lower carbohydrates. I think that comes down to how the individual performs from a metabolic level. And I think that some people can do great on a low carb diet and some people can do great on a high carb diet. If they're going to do a high carb diet that's low fat, they need to make sure they're eating nutrient dense fat sources. Jiffy peanut butter is not healthy fats. I see bodybuilders saying this all the time. That's just so dumb. But you can also get a full day's worth of micronutrients from 4 egg yolks, which is like 20 grams of fat. So you don't have to have a huge amount of fat to get micronutrients. Seed oils are not helping people's hormone production, even though they're fats. But you can also have a relatively low amount of carbohydrates in the diet and be just fine, as long as those carbohydrate sources are healthy and ideally have antioxidants and other nutrients in them as well. So there's a lot of ways people can do nutrition, but starting out with the vertical diet or Mike Dolce's approach to nutrition, I think is a fantastic way to begin.
Totally agree. Do you go out of your way to eat much like fish and seafood? Because like a lot of people are, deficient in iodine, things of that nature.
I'm very big on the high dose omega-3 supplement. So I use 4 grams of EPA DHA per day, which is equivalent to eating about half a pound of salmon a day. From a palatability standpoint, I don't like fatty fish very much. I just don't have a taste for salmon. In Australia, I love barramundi. Barramundi is wonderful. We get some really good mackerel in Australia. I have this rule that if you can't see the ocean, you should question the seafood. So growing up in Perth, Western Australia, we're on the coast, amazing seafood. I mean, oysters are a superfood as well. Things like this are wonderful for you. Over here in Lithuania, getting good quality fish, I'd be more concerned about the food poisoning. So I don't eat very much fish, but I am a massive, massive proponent, and I push it very hard, is if you're not someone who eats a large amount of fatty fish in the diet, you should definitely be getting a high quality omega-3 supplement to bring the omega-3 index over a 10. If you go on PubMed and you search omega-3, there are tens of thousands of studies showing a positive impact of omega-3 supplementation on every single health condition known to man. So, and the other thing that I see is that when I get guys come to me with their blood work, because I review about 20 or 30 client blood panels a day for my clinics, when I see guys who have these incredible lipid profiles, like the lipid profiles that a cardiologist would print out and put on his fridge, every single one of them is taking a high dose omega-3 supplement, every single one. So I very strongly recommend that people support their omega-3 intake, whether it's through diet or supplementation.
I just did a experiment, got blood work on both ends. It was like a 2-week experiment, kind of like in response to a lot of Mark Bell's sugar diet stuff, doing the opposite of it with high fat. But I doubled my testosterone in like a 2-week, 3-week span. And I started, it may be because of the macronutrient manipulation I was making, super high fat, minimal protein, very low carbs. But I also added in a can of cod liver more often than not throughout that span. Super high in vitamin D, vitamin A. I would imagine that had a pretty profound impact on hormone levels as well.
Cod liver is also a superfood. I mean, it's not for everyone's palate as well. I mean, it's got a taste for sure. But so you do a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, I've been doing keto for almost 11 years now.
Yeah. So the ketogenic diet, like it has. But I mean, you can do a garbage keto. I mean, you can eat KFC and just call it a ketogenic diet if you want to. I mean, it would technically still be one, but you can also do a ketogenic diet with incredibly nutrient dense sources of fat. And that's where I see people thriving. I mean, I get guys come to me who are doing ketogenic diets all the time and their blood work is absolutely garbage. But when you ask them what they eat, they go, "Oh, I eat keto." I'm like, "No, like what foods do you actually eat?" And it's just crap. But when you have guys come in who are doing a healthy ketogenic diet and they're eating good quality fatty meats, sometimes they're eating some organ meats, they've got things like avocado in there, they've got really healthy nutrient dense sources of fat. And I have a bunch of guys who still follow something like Dave Asprey's bulletproof diet, which I guess is kind of like a keto derivative spin-off kind of thing, but they're focusing on getting a large intake of fibrous vegetables as well. Their blood work is like incredible, like absolutely amazing. And it's similar, when I was talking to Mark Bell when I was out there for his podcast, he kind of just started the sugar diet thing and he was explaining it to me. And I was like, oh, that just sounds like what Ori Hofmeckler was talking about in his book, The Warrior Diet, which basically spelled out what they're now doing as the sugar diet, but exclusively with fruit during the day, which is obviously a healthier way to do it than eating gummy bears because there's more nutrients in the fruit. But just like you could be doing a high carb diet, drinking nothing but Coca-Cola and eating Sour Patch Kids, or you do a high carbohydrate diet, eating multiple servings of fresh organic fruit per day, the macros are going to be the same, but the micros and the inflammatory response to the food is going to be completely different. So I can imagine that if you've been doing a ketogenic diet long-term and you're thriving very well, you would have also tuned in to saying, hey, the quality of the fats that I'm eating. Like I used to teach mindfulness meditation. That was my job before I did this. I used to teach like science-based meditation. And one of the things that we did, the organization I was at, is we'd run like a community-based, like 1 hour guided leaded meditation that I'd do, at a community center. And this was when I was doing the ketogenic diet for a period. And I remember one time before I went, I had a 12 egg omelet before I went, just the 12 egg omelet. And I went and sat down and meditated, and my mind had never been more calm and steady and cool. And I was just sitting there being like, this nutritional intake of cholesterol and all the vitamins I've had, my brain is just completely thriving on this. So I think, just like yourself, if you've been following a diet approach for 11 years, it's because you've been like, hey, this works for me. I'm doing really well on this. And I think one of the problems is that if people have just been eating for taste their whole life, they haven't eaten well for long enough to then veer off it and realize how crappy that food makes them feel.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. Pivoting back to TRT specifically. So like I compete in natural bodybuilding. So like it's pretty much totally banned, outlawed, all that jazz. However, we've learned so much, especially in the last decade, around, hormonal impacts, endocrine system, longevity, health, well-being, all that good stuff. Is there ever an instance where, someone just not a good fit for TRT? Like if you're looking at it from a performance standpoint, like this is why professional bodybuilders competing on the IFBB stage take steroids. Like it's obviously got a performance benefit. But I guess the question is, what would be a use case in which it would not be optimal? It could be detrimental. What would be the point of diminishing returns for someone that's trying to optimize look like? I just kind of flesh that out a little bit, if you would.
Yeah. So this is this is something that I actually teach a lot of. So when I come to the States and I'm running seminars for either at the Silverback Summit or at the Olympia or for clinics that I'm partnered with, one of the things that I teach in terms of how to work with these patients is that one of the problems is that now that TRT, and I don't want to say it's a problem, one of the caveats to TRT becoming more mainstream is that like back when I started doing this 5 or 6 years ago, the only people who were coming to me for consults on TRT were like health and fitness enthusiasts because it wasn't a mainstream thing. There was no YouTube channels about it. There was no Joe Rogan talking about it. I mean, people would ask me like, what the hell is TRT? Like they had no idea. Whereas now when I tell people what I do, everyone knows what TRT is. Everyone wants to ask about it. And one of the downsides of that is that a lot of the time people who come in wanting TRT treatment are what my friend Jay Campbell affectionately refers to as metabolic dumpster fires. And this is a real problem because these guys have often destroyed their endocrine system from years or decades of poor health practices, and they want to get back on track, but their body is just so screwed up that if they take TRT in the way it's traditionally prescribed, their blood pressure will go through the roof and they'll be riddled with side effects that people typically call estrogenic side effects. So they can get things like gyno, water retention, their face swells up, they start crying when they watch a Marvel movie, all the stuff that you don't really want when you're taking, exogenous testosterone. You're having a whole bunch of the side effects and none of the good stuff.
Stop doing all the things you know you shouldn't be doing and start doing all the things you know you should be doing. If people are looking for where to start, it's that. Testosterone is what creates confidence. It's what gives the capacity for leadership. It's what drives the ability for one to become courageous and competent in their skill set. If you go on TRT and then live a lifestyle that you would never have those levels in the first place, your blood's going to get really